Hey guys, Fabio Palvelli here with a brand new video about the business side of design. If you're new around here, I myself am a visual designer and I worked in the field of architecture visualization for about 10 years. And every week I post a brand new video where I try to bridge the gap between business and design. This week I have as a guest on my show Liston Witherill, a sales trainer and consultant. Do not expect this interview to be about archivists specifically. Liston is not an archivist artist himself, he's not a designer, but he is an expert in his field. So this is a talk for those of you who are trying to understand how to optimize your sales process within your design/creative company. This is an interesting interview. We touch on a lot of topics like branding for designers, sales optimization, behavioral economics, and how to lead a possible value-based conversation with your clients. Okay, enough of me talking, just enjoy the show. 3, 2, 1, and we're recording. Liston, thank you very much for being here, man. How are you today?
I'm good. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, for anyone who is just tuning in and they're looking at this podcast and they're wondering, what is Fabio doing? What the hell is happening? Who is this person? He does not look like a designer at all. You're not a designer, right?
Well, what does a designer look like? No, I'm not a designer. No. Is it because I have a collared shirt on? Is that why you said that?
No, it's because you look relaxed and you're not nearing a nervous breakdown.
Fair enough. No, not today.
First of all, thank you very much for taking the time. Would you mind telling us who you are and what you do and why people should be listening to this particular episode of the show?
Sure. So my name's Liston Witherill. I run a company called Serve Don't Sell. The website is servedon'tsell.co, just how it sounds. And what I do is I help people get better at sales. I provide sales training for teams and especially people selling complicated services. So this is probably relevant to anybody listening to this. One of the kind of funny things about selling a service is you don't get to try it first, right? There's a lot of uncertainty about what I'm going to get, what I, the buyer, am going to get, and therefore trust is a huge part of that sale, and building trust is kind of a critical skill along the way. And so I help teams figure out kind of what's a better way to approach sales. And as the name implies, I'm very service oriented, and I don't want to get too woo-woo on you, but one thing that I deeply believe is one of our main purposes for being alive is to serve other people, is to help other people. And there's actually a way to do that when we sell. And it actually turns out to be a much more powerful way to sell. And so that's who I am. That's what I do. And the way we connected, of course, is I believe you listen to my podcast, which is called Modern Sales. So if you're in the market for another podcast and you want to get better at selling, I invite you to listen to Modern Sales.
I'm gonna put all the links to your website and to the podcast. I've been sharing your podcast in the past with some of my followers. I'm not really sure that they see why they should be listening to you, because they see what we do as an art and they see sales, and they're like, why is sales important for my business? But we'll touch on this a little bit later. Sure. I love the statement serve, don't sell, which is more or less, your motto, if you like. Would you mind telling us what you mean by this exactly? And how can this apply, generally speaking, to the design industry?
Yeah, so it sort of starts with how do people buy, right? And the way people buy is they're looking to improve their condition. So there's something going on right now, and if they're entertaining making a purchase, which means changing their behavior, what am I doing right now? They need to change that in order to make a purchase. And in order to help them facilitate that, we need to show them what the future can be like, right? And when I say serve, don't sell, what I mean is rather than waiting to show people kind of the insights that you can bring the creative thinking that you can apply, what it would be like to work with you. You want to show that before the sale happens. Now, this brings up an obvious tension that I get asked by a lot of people, which is, well, wait, are you saying I should just work for free? And to that I say, no, this isn't a hobby. It's not a nonprofit. You should get paid for what you do. However, you need to go far enough for the person that you're selling to really understand who is this person, what insights and sort of thinking can they bring to this problem. And so when I say serve, I mean understanding what your client is attempting to do and helping them reach that goal as quickly as possible. Now, that also means, dear listener, occasionally you're going to have to tell this person, you know what, you shouldn't work with me. I don't do my projects like that. That means occasionally you're going to have to tell your potential clients, I don't think that approach is going to work. Let me give you an alternative, right? Because we need to show them that we're experts and that we're confident in the things that we say and do. And that is kind of a crucial piece of service. So that's what I mean when I serve, don't sell.
I mean, I'm gonna go slightly off script here, but it is a scary thing to do, to turn down clients and to say, you know, this is not going to work, we cannot work together. Usually artists, they find themselves very often in a position that they have to accept everything that they can get because, you know, otherwise they cannot make ends meet. I mean, how do you kind of approach this side of the mindset?
Great question. So there's a couple things that feed into it, but I just want to go back. I should have said something else, and then I'll get to your question. How do I approach the mindset of kind of scarcity, right? What if I lose this and I don't get another one? What I wanted to do is also contrast what do most people think about when they think about selling. And what most people think about is high pressure tactics, persuasion, tricks. What are the special words that I can use to get people to do the things I want them to do? And they also think about pitching and sales decks and that kind of stuff. Now, the problem with that is it's all about you. And what we're really trying to do is get people to pay us money so we can do the thing that we love to do for them. Yeah. And that means the thing that we're going to do has to be about them. So let's just, when I say serve, don't sell, what I'm suggesting is make the sales process disproportionately about the other person and rather than yourself. Now to the mindset question. So what are the drivers of people feeling afraid of telling a client something that they may not want to hear, right? The drivers are, well, number one, maybe you just don't have enough opportunity present. So that can be one. You don't know enough people who are in a position to hire you or refer you business. And so that's a problem that needs to be addressed, right? Another driver, of course, is just purely mindset, as you're suggesting. So this comes down to kind of the Carol Dweck book Mindset, where there's two types of mindset. There's a fixed mindset and there's a growth mindset. In one, I see the world as fixed and finite. In the other, I see sort of an ever-expanding universe. Paradoxically, we know both to be true. So I don't want to get into that too much, but the truth is, for any individual designer, look, you're not trying to be Amazon, right? You're not trying to be the only company that sells stuff to people. There's so much opportunity out there, way more than you could ever service. And so what I'd ask you to do is start to ask yourself, you know, what are the opportunities that I haven't tapped yet? Whenever you get afraid of this, and the time to do it isn't during the sales call. The time to do it is sort of in your off time, where you're sort of thinking about, how am I going to generate more opportunities for me to do the work I love? Or as a business, how am I going to generate more pipeline for my business? And the answer to that is always, I need a market and I need a way to address them, and something interesting to say. So we don't have time to cover all of that. But I would challenge you to think about, and maybe just explain, like, you know, why do you think that there is not enough opportunity? And if you force yourself to do that, I promise you'll come to the conclusion repeatedly that there's way more opportunity than you could ever service on your own. It's like literally impossible for you to say yes to every possible gig out there that would demand your expertise. And so that's one exercise I would recommend you do. The second exercise is, and again, I know this is a little bit woo-woo, but what I say is I'm not trying to make people better at sales. I'm trying to make better people. And, you know, I think you need to sit down and also write out, what are you afraid of? Like, if this client goes away, what is the absolute worst thing that can happen? And for most of us, I think what we'll find is the fear is just totally irrational. And it's one based on sort of an irrationality that causes us to think that no other opportunity will ever surface. We're not good enough. The world doesn't love us.
Yeah.
And there's just no truth to that.
I think there is a phrase that I've heard a couple of times is, how can you lose a client that you never had? So, you know, it's
right.
Like if the client comes to you and you say no, yeah, well, you move on and you try to do better next time.
Well, or I think even more scary than that for some people is to challenge them, but you're still interested in working with them. And what if they go away then? Well, if you have boundaries in your business and boundaries in the way that you want to deliver and boundaries in the way that you want to work with clients, then if they don't accept the challenge, they're not your perfect client.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
They've just demonstrated what you wanted to learn.
Yeah.
So it's actually exactly what we want to happen. Is some people will come closer to us and say, wow, that's amazing. I want to work with someone who does that. And other people won't. And that's kind of the point.
Listen, I'm going to ask you a question and it's going to be very specific, and I'm pretty sure that no one has ever asked you this question before. How do you sell more? As a creative company, let me add that.
Sure. Yeah. How do you sell more? What was going to be my next question. Of course, people have asked that. So sales is a function of a few things, right? So how do I sell more? Well, I need more people to know that I exist, right? So that's typically the function of marketing. I need more people who know that I exist to be interested in working with me. And then once I enter into those conversations, I need to have more effective conversations. So those are basically the levers, right? So who knows about me? How many leads am I getting? People who raise their hand and say, yes, that's something I want to talk about. And then once I have those leads, what am I doing in order to bring them to conclusion? The first thing, if you're not sure what to do in order to sell more, if you're one person or 1,000 people, it doesn't matter. The first thing you need to assess is, what's your level of maturity in those three different measures, right? Who knows that you exist? How many leads are you getting? And what are you doing to close those leads? So for instance, if you say no one knows that we exist, but boy, we close 100% of our proposals. Well, all right. It doesn't mean you don't have a sales problem. It just means you don't have enough opportunity right now, right? So I would address that first. So sort of prioritizing what to do is the biggest thing, but you know, to be a little bit more direct in your, to answer your question a little bit more directly, the number one thing that I recommend people to do in order to sell more is to be curious, is to talk to their clients, ask them questions. It's not about you. You want to develop the skill of listening and understanding first and foremost before you worry about putting together the perfect pitch or the perfect positioning. If you listen to clients and what their problems are and get them to talk to you about those problems and how deep they are, it's going to be much easier to sell anything. They're going to teach you how they want to buy and what they want to buy.
Yeah.
So that's the number one skill that I would recommend, is the sort of investigative step. When you're talking to people, build rapport so they trust you and ask great questions. And that will get you so much farther than, you know, any degree of, you know, I have a bunch of books that I recommend salespeople read on my website, but you don't have to read those 35 books or whatever it is to know that if you just pay attention to people and take a real interest in them, they're going to be much more attuned to whatever you have to say next, and you'll say smarter things. because it'll be directly relevant to that person you're talking to. So if you want to sell more, my number one piece of advice is understand what the pain is that this person is experiencing. And the best way to do that is by listening.
Let me ask you, so very often what happens is that offices, they receive emails from, say, an architect or a developer, and those guys, they simply ask for a quote. They'll send you a brief description of what needs to be done. And sometimes these people, these clients, they don't like to have a follow-up where people call them up, because essentially they're just fishing for the best price. What is the best thing to do in situations like this? Because I still believe that one should try to pursue a phone contact or like a face-to-face conversation whenever it's possible. But when the circumstances don't allow it, what is the next best approach?
So do I understand correctly? I'm a freelancer, expert artist of some sort. I get an email asking for a quote with and it has like an RFP attached.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. So the first thing I would do is call them. Sometimes in the RFP, it says, please no phone calls under any circumstances. So that can go both ways. You can call, like, I don't mind breaking the rules personally, but I know when I'm hiring someone, if I say, please no phone calls, and someone calls me, I won't consider them under any circumstances. So you're taking a risk if you do call. What I would say in those circumstances is you respond with an email saying, thank you very much for considering me. I really appreciate that you sent me this email. I don't respond to RFPs unless I have a chance to talk to you about what you're trying to accomplish. If you're open to a phone call, I'd love to have it. And maybe even include, here's why I do this, right? The reason I do this is because I don't want to quote you on the wrong thing. There's some things that are left open to interpretation. The only way to clear that up is through a phone call, right? And if the person says, no, just send me a quote, my feeling, and now I'm not recommending you say this to the potential client, but if I received that message from the client saying, no way, just send us a quote, my thought would be, well, I'm not selling, an iPad here, right? You can't, it's not like a standardized thing that you can just buy and all of them are the same and there's a million of them that exist in the world. That's not what I'm selling, right? Part of what I'm selling as an expert is the way I think and the way I can translate what you're trying to accomplish into the work that I do. And so, I would say push back first and foremost. I personally don't respond to RFPs. The only way I would is if they were really big and the client had strategic value to me, because I know that the chances of winning a typical RFP is pretty low, unless you already know the person or have a relationship. So I was in a business where most of our business was driven by RFPs. Let's say a third of all of our new business was driven by RFPs. And it's a tough business to be in. And for an individual, what I would say is your time would be better spent developing relationships with people who could hire you in the future than sitting out and responding to these very meticulous, long proposals that you generally have a very low chance of winning in the first place. So that would be my advice. I think one thing you need to understand with RFPs is why do they get written? And, one of the main drivers is someone has a protocol for how they buy, and it says we always have to evaluate 3 different prices.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't mean they're going to choose you, right? And that's kind of a shitty way to approach. I'm sorry, can I cuss on your show?
It's okay. Don't worry.
Okay, cool. It's not a good way to approach winning new business for you, right? Because you're now in a position where you're just checking boxes for someone, and that's not what you want to do. So generally, I would say avoid RFPs, allocate that time differently. But if you see one that's really interesting, always push back. Now, I'll turn that question around on you. If you push back and the client says, no, we're not willing to talk to you, are you asking me then what do you do at that point?
Well, first of all, just for the listeners at home, because I don't know if they know, but RFP is request for proposal.
Yes.
Just, so that they know. I don't know, because it goes back to this idea of like, and we're going to touch this in the future, of like positioning. Eventually, you want to put yourself in a place where clients would eventually contact you because they know who you are and what you do, and they would not do it sending you an RFP. They would do it just because they would like to have a conversation. But nevertheless, that would happen anyway. In my case, usually, my mind is, if they don't care enough to have a phone call with me, then they don't care enough about their projects. Maybe they're just shopping for the lowest price. And I don't like to think of myself as that kind of designer. And usually, if I don't have the need, I let those things go. But obviously, what I do with my clients, we have sort of like templates which are ready to go, that kind of give an outline and sort of a abstract price list. And those are sent out when we see that, it doesn't matter because the client is not gonna call us anyway and they're shopping for the lowest price.
So Ivan, hold on, let me stop you there. So if you know on your price list that you're not the lowest price and the client is just shopping for the lowest price, why even send them your price list?
Well, sometimes, if the situation is that these guys, they get, say, 3 offers, and these 3 offers are like, $200, $200, and then there is one for $700, and then there is one for $2,000, they'll be like, let us just, see what the difference might be.
Pick the middle one.
That's usually what happens. But,
right.
they might be curious and they might come back,
Yeah. One thing I wanted to add is whether or not you respond to RFPs is partially dictated by the types of clients you want. So I don't want to introduce too much complication here, but when I said I was in a business that was driven by request for proposal, we did a lot of work with the government. You cannot get government contracts mostly like 80 to 90% of the time without going through their process.
Yes.
It's very difficult to go around their process. I also recently, it's not published yet, but I'm working on a series in my podcast, Modern Sales, that I'm calling Buyer Insights. So I'll be interviewing buyers with different titles. So talent development, marketing, sales, different people within the company to understand how they buy. And I spoke to a woman who worked at IBM, and she said she would never hire a company who didn't respond to their RFP. 100% of the time, everything went to RFP. And they would give them a list of 200 requirements that the company had to certify that they had to meet before they were willing to do even a test with the company, which is crazy to me. And I said, if that was me, I would tell you I'm not going to respond to this. And, what did you do in that circumstance? And she said, well, mostly no one did that. She goes, if I really like the company, though, I would still allow them to do a test, even if they told me they didn't respond to my RFP. So this brings me around full circle now to what you said. You said most companies will only work with you if you're well positioned. And if you're well positioned, they'll go directly to you and not put you in the RFP process. What was really interesting about this conversation that I had with Ariel, is her name, is she basically said the better positioned companies had more leverage in her negotiations, even when she had an RFP. So that's something to consider, is if you are well positioned and you can clearly demonstrate how you would be different than the other likely candidates who respond to that RFP, you're going to have a much easier time pushing back on the process. I think your solution to have a standard price list, I think that's fine. I think also you can just quickly say, like, I'm not going to write a 20-page proposal, but, typically a project like this would fall between, around $10,000. But I think it might be less than that. If you want more detail, we can talk over the phone.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Just to give them some idea, whatever it is. But I would really caution you not to spend a lot of time on that.
Of course. And well, this is a very good segue for the next question, because, this is also one of the things that I get asked the most is, how do you find more and better clients? And, given there is no direct answer, but how do you personally approach questions like this when they're coming from people that are trying to get better clients?
Yeah. So I would, if you're looking to get better clients, the first question I would ask you is, what are you giving? What are you putting out into the world to make people aware of you, to help them out? So first question is, who's the client? So this is where most people fall off, and they say something like, I don't know, anybody who can pay me $200 an hour to do design work. And it's like, well, who the hell is that?
Yeah.
There's lots of people who could do that. Do you want to work in food and beverage? Do you want to work in CPG? Do you want to work in like architecture and visualization? Like, where do you want to work? Who are these people? And then within that, who are the specific people who could hire you? So that's the first question, is who? And the next question is, what can you do to help them? So I'm a big fan of, you don't have to be an expert marketer to do this. I invest, it's probably weird for someone who talks about sales a lot. I invest a lot in marketing because I like having a lot of relationships, and I like the kind of wider reach that it provides. And I also think the ongoing usefulness of the assets that I create is far bigger than one person. Whereas if you're doing direct prospecting, it's by definition one-to-one or one to very few. Anyway, I digress. One thing that you could do is just go on LinkedIn and connect with people who could be in a position to hire you, and with a few tools, keep a relationship going with them. One of the great things about LinkedIn is, and by relationship, I don't mean, hey, do you need some help? Hey, do you need some help? That's not a relationship, right? But if you can go onto LinkedIn and periodically message them, share an article, I know this is all sort of standard advice, but the reason this works is because repeated exposure over time, it's kind of a flaw in our brains, but repeated exposure over time makes you seem trustworthy, right? There is a rational reason, which is people who show up repeatedly aren't just here to get whatever they want necessarily. They're more likely to have some investment in my interest. So I think LinkedIn is huge for me. There's lots of automations. I don't have time to go through all the different things I do on LinkedIn, but basically I'm connecting with people, I'm following up with messages with them, and then eventually moving them to email. Actually, I'll be blogging about this on my personal site, liston.io, soon, about my this prospecting process that I'm going to use in order to turn bystanders basically into website visitors, then newsletter subscribers and podcast listeners, and then eventually clients. So it's kind of a multi-step process. Another thing you could do, which is far more immediate, is to look at job postings. So companies are always on the lookout for people to help in some specified way, and just go through those job postings. Of course, those are going to give you less leverage because you're showing up, I don't want to say desperate, but much needier than someone who says, hey, I thought it would be good to connect. And then when the person has the need, they reach out to you. Yeah. That relationship gives you much more leverage, but job postings are a good way to do it as well. Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Also, okay. Of course, we could go in greater depth into this.
Oh my God. Well, we could spend 5 days just on this one question. How do I get more people?
The beautiful thing is that, people should really come and listen to you on your podcast, because these answers, the reason why I'm asking you this stuff, it's because I've heard it on your podcast. And I think that, now me asking you would validate the fact that these things are important even for people working in our field, if that makes any sense.
Right, and here you are giving me free publicity because of my podcast, so thank you.
Well, you deserve it, so that's my way to give back.
I appreciate it.
In one of your podcasts, you have touched on the idea of value, and I love that podcast. I think it was incredible. You can really explain the behavior and the psychology behind the way people make certain decisions in relationship to value. Can you expand a little bit on the idea of value, and how does a company go about raising their own perception of value for, their image, their services? How do you communicate that to a client?
Okay, so starting from the beginning in the sales process that I recommend, essentially what you're going to do is build something that I call PGV, pain, goals, and value. So what is the pain that I'm experiencing, the client, right now? What goals am I trying to seek by solving that pain? And then if I achieve it, what is that going to give me? How valuable is it? And so when you're asking about value, it's in that context. The reason value is so important is because it helps our clients fully understand everything that they're going to get from us. The best way to assess value is when we take goals. So can you give me an example? I want to make this relevant to your audience. What is like a typical project that they would do for a client, and what's the pain that the client is feeling?
Well, okay, this could be a good example. Say that a client is working on a project which is done together, say, with the municipality of a city. So, they're getting money half from the government, half from the investors. They're trying to, keep a low budget. And these houses are usually very ugly because they're built on a budget, yet they need to make them look appetible for, people to go there and say, okay, it will be a nice place to live in.
So a visualization artist is building sort of a pitch to get funding. Is that right?
Usually it's it can be different things, because it could be the architect that is trying to sell the project to both the municipality and the client, or it could be the client that is trying to convince the municipality to get the money.
I see.
It can be very different.
And they need sexy looking houses in order to get the city to say yes. Okay. So, what's the problem in this situation? The problem is that the client feels that the design that they've come up with isn't adequate, and they feel there's a lot of risk in presenting it the way it is to the city, and the city may not say yes to fund the project, right? Okay, so what's their goal? Their goal is to have really the best possible presentation in order to get the city to say yes to that. Okay, cool. We got our pain, we got our goal. What is the value of achieving the goal? So I would ask the client, okay, so let's wave a magic wand. I love this question. Let's wave a magic wand together. The houses look perfect. You take that to the city. What happens next? And they go, well, I'll tell you what happens, right? They're going to say, well, we'll get the funding, and then the funding is worth X amount of money, and then we'll be able to build the project, and the project is worth X percent to us. We'll take so much profit on it, and that'll accrue over 15 years, whatever it is, right? And so, what I would try to figure out is, what is my contribution? So that's one way to approach it, is what do I add to this? But the easier way to do it is just to ask, how valuable would it be for you to achieve your goals? So if the client says, well, this is a $50 million development, huge homes and sort of planned community development, then now you're attaching your price to that number, right? So the upside for the client, let's say, $50 million project, they'll make a 20% margin. It's $10 million in their pocket, right? So I would say, well, if I understand correctly, this is a $10 million profit project for you. That sounds like a pretty incredible thing for you guys to actually execute. And imagine all those wonderful people living in those houses and what that will do for the community, right? We're trying to paint a full picture of what will this look like, and what's not just the quantifiable value. In this case, it would be dollars, but also what's the emotional value? How great would it be for that to happen? What would that do for your company? Could you get follow-on work with this municipality in the future? All of these other pieces of value that are descendant from this one decision that the municipality is focused on. And so if you have problems trying to assess the value that you bring, the one thing that I would tell you to ask your client is, how will you measure it if it happens? And they'd probably say, well, in this case, they would say, well, the city says yes or no. Okay, what happens if they say yes? What happens if they say no? Is the project over? Do you get another shot at it? And then, sort of what is your upside? So that's what I mean by value is, can we both quantify and qualify what a client will get? So the things that we can measure, but also the things that we can observe but can't measure. Like, will you be happier? Will your business be better off? Will you have more opportunity? Those kinds of things. And what's critical here is what you think doesn't matter. So you can suggest to your client, well, I've worked with other clients before and they've gotten this type of value from the project, but that doesn't matter. What matters is the next question. Do you think you'd get that? Right? And they're like, yes. Okay, cool. We have agreement. So, and you're starting to sort of build a case for them to make a decision. And that's what we're trying to do with value, is to really appeal to a little bit more to their rationality, but also to their emotion, because obviously we all want to be, better looking, younger, and and better at everything we do in the future.
I think also in terms of like existentialism, for the artist, the biggest problem that they have to fight with is that, we identify in the work that we make. So there is sort of like a little bit of our soul in what we do. And so when having a value conversation, I think it's very important to descend a little bit from the fact that we're very emotional about our work and understanding the value of the work that we're doing. Because, like the artist would say, okay, if I'm not charging 1,000 because I understand that the project is a lot more valuable, what if I charge 10,000 but then my client doesn't get the job? What it's important to remember is that we are selling our professionalism, our skills, and our commitment. Then all the rest is just a question of like, if it has to happen and the client will win the job, because it's still very much like a lottery. Do you understand? The only thing is that I feel like artists are very limited by the fact that they cannot give any type of guarantee that the project is going to be successful. But so does any other business. There is no guarantee that whatever you can do as a consultant, as a salesperson, that it's going to actually deliver on what we are hoping. Am I correct, or am I saying something that doesn't make sense?
You're totally correct. I mean, there's no guarantee, right? But in anything that we do, in any decision we make, in anything we buy, there's never a guarantee. Yeah. But there are differences in certainty and there are differences in risk. And so it's a spectrum, right? Sure, it's not guaranteed. So I'll give you an example, right? Will the Earth continue spinning? Well, it's not guaranteed, but probably, right? Like there's no evidence to suggest that that's going to stop happening. Versus, will I become a billionaire? No guarantee, way less likely, right? The Earth will probably keep spinning and I probably won't become a billionaire. Like these are things that we can say, there's different levels of sort of uncertainty with these things, right? So what I'm trying to tell you is, I think you brought up two separate things. One is how can you be comfortable with the fact that there's a monetary value placed on your art? And the second thing is, given that you place a value, what do you do in the circumstance that the client doesn't accept it or doesn't win the job? So here's the thing. Whether you place the value on your work or your client does, someone's going to.
Yeah.
It's unavoidable, right?
It's very important to understand this.
Right. So even if it makes you uncomfortable to place value on your work, let's say you have a day job, right? And you were making $50,000 a year. Well, your employer has placed a value of your work of, say, like $32 an hour, right? Given the fully loaded compensation and everything else that goes into having a full-time employee. If you're getting paid $1,000 to do something that takes you 20 hours, the value on your work is $50 an hour or $1,000 for the finished product. Now, you don't have to value yourself based on time. You can value it based on the output that you're giving. But no matter what, someone's going to value your work. And what I would urge you to do is, even if it's slightly uncomfortable, it will become more comfortable over time if you just push yourself to help set that value. Because if you don't, you'll be outsourcing it to your client, and chances are you will value your services more than they do.
Very good.
That's my speech.
Listen, we're already 40 minutes in, and I know that we are short on time. So I want to ask you 2 more questions, because I know that we got to wrap it up. But I'd be interested in listening, what do you think about branding? Because many designers, they completely ignore the importance of branding. What is the role of branding in business, and how does a design company benefit from branding?
Well, I think it's really ironic that designers don't value branding, right? Because the power of a visual identity is one of familiarity, right? And trust.
Yes.
And so, I think at a really fundamental level, if you're a designer and you don't have a strong visual brand and some sort of value associated with it, and value doesn't need to be monetary, right? It could be like, we think biomimicry should influence all design. That could be part of your brand, right? Whatever it is, that's going to communicate to your clients that you're serious about design. I always think it's funny when there's like a web designer who doesn't have a website. And it's like, dude, do you take this seriously? Like, you're trying to convince me how important a website is.
Though. I can see that happening because, people get so busy with their work that they absolutely ignore all the rest, I'm
That's
not
right.
saying that it's a good thing.
Of course. And some people will say, well, I need to do client work. I don't have time to do that other stuff. To which I'll always say, well, just charge more and then you can have more time set aside to market yourself, right? And to build a presentation. This kind of harkens back to your question about clients. How do I get better clients? And the truth is, whoever your clients are today, they're going to want slightly different things. They're going to perceive value slightly differently, and they're going to have different requirements than the clients you want tomorrow. You're not going to be able to deliver exactly the same thing and package it exactly the same way. And so if you want to move up, in most circumstances, you're going to have some level of brand, some level of marketing, something that shows people who you are and what you believe and why they should do business with you.
Yeah, that's true. So let me ask you, because at this point, I think that this is a trap that I've set up for myself.
Okay.
What should people then do during their own downtime in order to improve their chance to close more sales, create more leads, and position themselves in a better way?
Well, that depends on how you define downtime. So if you define downtime as any time, like you're going to work, this is what most people do in kind of freelance or time-driven services fields, is they work as much as they can for their clients. Sometimes it's 20 hours, sometimes it's 60 hours a week, sometimes it's 100 hours a week. Whatever it is, they say, I'm going to work around the clock in order to meet my client demands. And then when I don't have client work, that's not work. That's just fun time. Well, I think you need to reorient yourself. You're a business, right? So what I would recommend to most people is limit the amount of client work you're willing to take on, which may mean you need to raise your prices, and allocate at least 50% of your workday to things that aren't client delivery. marketing, sales, building assets, intellectual property, research projects that you can do. What this is going to do is allow you to deliver better work to your clients also, right? So the reason I can come here today and have an informed conversation and have an answer for every single question you're asking me is because I write regularly, I record a podcast, I'm writing a book. I know more about this topic as a result of all of that.
Yeah.
Right? So I think for most people, again, whether you're a small firm or an individual, you need to allocate more time to sales and marketing. And so what do you do with your downtime? Really depends on where your weaknesses are, which goes back to what I said earlier. But, I believe you need to choose a few marketing channels and do them regularly. And by regularly, I mean at least weekly. Mm-hmm. So, for me, that's a podcast and writing and LinkedIn and social media promotion, which I have help with. I don't do all of that myself, but, mostly I'm sort of the engine behind the content. For you, maybe it's something completely different, right? Maybe you want to do search engine marketing because you think you're the best at Google Ads. Maybe you want to do some pro bono work from nonprofits who have great boards of directors who could get you more work, right? Whatever it is, you got to pick a thing and figure out what do you think you can show up to do over and over again on a regular basis, because marketing, a lot of us look at marketing and how do I get more business? We look at it as if it's a short-term thing.
Yeah.
How can I do this in the next 3 months? And it's just not.
Yeah.
I mean, there are things you can do in the short term, but they're not going to be nearly as beneficial as if you put 2 years into something, right?
Farming.
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, I'll give you an example, right? My project plan for my book is going to be start to finish, if everything goes well, about 6 months, including the marketing of the book. And I haven't even released it yet once I finished it, right? That's just to get to the launch of the book.
Do you have a little bit of time to talk about the book, or do you have to wrap it up now? Because we're 46 minutes in.
I can keep going, yeah. What do you want to know about the book? I just
want to ask you, what is it going to be about? Because, eventually, I listen to your podcast. I listen to the one of Seth. I listen to the one of Blair. But it's always good to have a handbook that is based on that kind of stuff. Because reading, for some reason, it really pushes stuff into my coconut. And, having a book, if you'll ever release one, it will be a great way to consolidate this years-long discussion that you have started.
So I will have a book, that not if I ever release one. I will have a book. It will be released.
Sorry, wrong choice of words.
No, it's fine. So I'm targeting a release date of December 18 or January 19. I'm not sure exactly. It depends on a few different things. But that's only a 60-day window there. So that's going to be the release date. The book is about my methodology and approach to selling. There's some questions about exactly how the book will come together, but as you probably know from listening to my podcast, I weave in a lot of stories, seemingly unrelated things. Like I've told a story of the Challenger mission and how the space shuttle exploded. I've told stories recently. Today I was writing about the 2008 financial crisis and how that negotiation came together and what needed to happen in order for the U.S. to pass legislation and prevent the world from spiraling out of control. But I also bring in research from economics and neuroscience to really understand what makes people work, and therefore how can we sell based on how people like to buy and how people are. And so the book is going to be a combination of what I know about how people are. And in addition to that, okay, given people are this way, what do I do about it? How do I sell more effectively given this information? And so, there will be all kinds of supporting resources that you can get on my website that'll be attached to the book and mentioned in the book. There will be questions and examples of dialogue. all kinds of sort of rich information that you can use the book as a reference so that you always know what to do next.
Yeah. Listen, do you have time for one more question? And I promise this is the last one.
Yeah, that's fine. Go for it.
You know, a lot of people are threatened by technology, and there is a lot of automation happening, especially in the field of software. You have AI, you know, basically computer programs that can do the work of 3 people in a few minutes. How do you envision the future of the service industry? What do you think people should do in order to prepare themselves and keep relevant for the future?
Yeah. Boy, that's a big last question. So I care deeply about this question, and it's one that I've been exploring behind the scenes, and I'll probably start writing about on my personal blog soon. But I think the short of it is you have to do things that robots can't. So I'll give you an example, right? So if I want to reach the market more effectively, actually, this is relevant to the book. I was just doing some research on the history of sales, and I'm trying to answer the question, why do we all have so much freaking baggage around sales? Like, where does that come from? And one of the original purposes of sales is it was cheaper to send a human being to your door, to knock on your door and tell you about this new paintbrush or whatever cheap thing that they were selling, and sell it to you. And so there was a market awareness function, and there was also a persuasion and kind of salesmanship function, and a delivery taking or a order taking function, right? I have to take your money and then I have to put it in. Like, almost all that's gone now. I don't need a human being to knock on your door. I don't need a human being to take your payment, right? And in a lot of cases, like in the case of anything that you buy that's, say, under $1,000, I don't need a human being to persuade me to buy this thing. I can make the decision for myself based on how your website looks, right? Now, I use this as a metaphor for the future of services. We've pulled out a lot of different functions of sales, right? Sales is a service business. Yet, there's still way more salespeople today than there were back when it started. Why is that? Well, the hardest parts are always going to be the last to be automated. The parts that have the most uncertainty, the parts where it's hardest to write an algorithm to figure this out, and the parts that deal with messy human decision making.
Yeah.
So, I'll give you another example, right? I love music, and I've been producing music for 20 years.
You're a rapper, right?
I am, indeed. And there will be a time when you can probably type in to your computer, talk to your computer, and tell it what kind of track you want to create, and it'll make it for you, right? There will always be people involved in those strategic decisions, though. What is this? What am I trying to accomplish? That's where you need to focus. So if you're in 3D rendering or design, the big thing you want to get at is, how can I help my clients accomplish what they want to? Eventually, little pieces of your job will all be automated away. It's easier now to edit a photo than it was 40 years ago before Photoshop, right? But photo editing is still a big business. Photography is still a big business. But the more democratized the tools become, the cheaper it is to shoot photos and to produce photos, the cheaper the service will be, right? There's going to be a competition. Some people will be in the top 1% and make tons of money, but generally, the easier it is for other people to replicate what you're doing, and especially for a machine to replicate it, the less you're going to be paid for it. So that's what I would recommend, is look for those spots where it's going to be very difficult for software to do it for you, and look for those spots where it's a little less democratized and the tools aren't quite as good yet.
I think that democratization is really a key word and a very important one, and it's very good that you're mentioning it. I want to just make a little point on what you said. if we look at the way economy works and things keep getting more expensive and more difficult to buy, let's talk about, the market for houses. The price of the built environment has been going up 30% in the last 15 years. Yet somehow artists have convinced themselves that because of the technological advancement and everything, things should be cheaper. But the earnings and the risks and everything gets pointed in that direction. Why are we competing against ourselves? And this is the reason why I try to push all the time people to think about our job in economical terms. Because if you don't do it for yourself, your client certainly won't, right? Your client will keep saying, yeah, we need it cheaper, we need it cheaper, we need it cheaper.
Well, maybe that's not a client you want.
Yeah, exactly. Listen, 55 minutes. I don't want to take any more of your time. If people want to find you, where should they go?
Best thing you can do is, if you're interested in the podcast I mentioned, just look up Modern Sales in the podcatcher you're using. The website that I mentioned is servedon'tsell.co, servedon'tsell.co. And I also mentioned my own website. So if you want to kind of read the bigger questions that I'm interested in asking, particularly around why we trust certain things and how we make decisions, you could go to my website, liston.io.
I'll make sure to put all the links in the video description. Liston, thank you very much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. I'm going to stop the recording. Don't go anywhere so that I can say thank you one more time. All right?
Sure, you got it.
Cheers, man. Thank you very much.